there is a big spring called Gihon, and this Gihon spring eventually fed the pool of Siloam, but that is much, much later. In ancient times, there was just water coming out from the mountain to the valley, and when Jerusalem originally was established, who knows when, 10,000 years ago or whenever, they just built a small a fortress above the spring. With time, the city grew further down and further up, and we don't really know much about the history of that place. We just know from the Bible that the last occupiers of this city before King David were the Jebusites. So this place was called also Jebus. Come a little bit closer because there will be people coming behind you. The city was called Jebus, and then David came and conquered it and made it its capital. In ancient times, it was a customary for a king to invite God to dwell in his town. How do you do this? You build a palace and say, please God, come and live in this palace. These palaces were called temples. So they were temples all over the world, not only here. And that was supposed to be the place where God, or whatever God people worshipped at the time, they're all idols, right? But this is what they believed, is that their God come and actually dwells near the king in the capital of the city. I mean, in the capital of the country. So when David established his capital here, he too wanted to invite God to live in the city and wanted to build a palace for God. But God told David, wait a generation. It's not you who will build the palace for me, it will be your son. So if the city was down there, the top of the hill would be over there. And David already made preparation for the temple to be built there. But it was actually his son Solomon that built the original temple on top of the hill. And for the next 400 years, the capital of the country was in Jerusalem. The house of God was on top over there. And people, when they wanted to go to the house of God, they walked uphill, they ascended. That's the ascent. When Pastor Andrew mentioned that he brought songs of ascent, this is the ascent. From the city down there to the top to where the temple was over there. 400 years after Solomon built the temple, it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And another 100 years after that, it was rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah. That takes us to 500 BC. So from 500 BC, we have the period that we call the Second Temple period. Okay, the first temple is from Solomon until the destruction, the Babylonian destruction in 600 BC. And the second temple is from 500 BC until the second destruction in 70 AD. So that means that Jesus actually saw the second temple. Now, just a generation before Jesus, and this is, if you stand around, you can see better. Why don't you just, people in the back, you can come and see this. This is what the temple, we believe, looked like in its full glory. But the temple was only on this section here. Okay? And it stood on top of a summit until King Herod. That's a generation, 2 generations before Jesus. King Herod decided to build a big plaza around the temple and to allow people to congregate around the temple, because when the temple, I already mentioned to you, was the house of God. The ordinary people were not allowed in there. They could congregate around the temple, but there was no room because it was on the summit. So to make it flat, what Herod did, he built 4 gigantic walls around the whole compound and elevated the edges to be as high as the top. So the top stayed on its place. This is still the top of the hill, but all around is elevated high in the air. And this plaza was the congregation place. Part of it, this part, was a market. This is where Jesus came and yelled at the money changer. That's on this side. It wasn't considered a holy ground. And the holy ground itself, around the temple, only you could go in only if you're Jewish and only after you've been purified. You had to purify yourself. And that usually was done at the pool of Siloam, all the way down at the very bottom of the valley where we're going to end our tour. So those four gigantic walls, they still exist today. The temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70, but the walls still stand. And this one over there is one of them. As you make a step to the left, you can actually see it. Let's go further up.
I don't see any dogs.